My name is Rebecca Quinn. I am 58 years old, and the day my husband's will was read, my life as I knew it ended. The office of Attorney Charles Morrison smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the large oak table. I sat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Beside me was my daughter, Madison. 32, confident, elegant, and dressed in a black designer suit that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. She didn't glance at me once. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. I'll proceed with the reading of Robert Quinn's last will and testament. His voice was calm, professional, almost detached, as if he were reading the grocery list of a stranger. To my beloved wife, Rebecca Quinn, he began, I leave the cabin on Pine Ridge Road and all its contents. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. The cabin? That old, neglected place that had not been touched in years? He continued, to my daughter, Madison Quinn, I leave the family home at 42 Maplewood Avenue, all financial accounts, investments, and the remaining estate totaling $6 million. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. My heart pounded in my chest. $6 million. The house we had built together, everything we had worked for, all of it, handed to our daughter. I turned to Madison, searching her face for some reaction, some understanding. She only smiled faintly and looked straight ahead, her chin slightly raised, the kind of expression that told me she had been expecting this. There must be a mistake, I whispered. Mr. Morrison shook his head slowly. Your husband was very clear in his instructions, Mrs. Quinn. When we walked out of the office, the spring sunlight felt cruelly bright. Madison didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence carried the weight of something I could not yet name. As I stood in the parking lot, staring at the letter of the law that had just rewritten my life, one thought echoed in my mind. I thought I had lost everything that day, but I had no idea my real inheritance was waiting miles away, hidden beneath dust and pine. The silence between us on the drive home was deafening. I kept waiting for Madison to speak, to say something, anything that would make this easier to understand. But when we pulled into the driveway of the house I had called home for 25 years, she turned to me with a look that was cold, almost rehearsed. Mom, she said, we need to talk about living arrangements. I felt my stomach tighten. Living arrangements? She exhaled sharply, as if I were being unreasonable. This is my house now, and I think it's best if you move into the cabin. You have a week to get your things together. For a moment I thought she was joking. The tone, the words, it was all too absurd to be real. Madison, I said softly, this is where your father and I raised you. This is our home. No, Mom, she replied. It was. Dad left it to me. You'll be more comfortable at Pine Ridge. It'll give you space. Space. The word stung like an insult dressed as kindness. I looked around the kitchen where every corner held memories, the wall where her height had been marked in pencil, the table where we celebrated birthdays, the window where I had waited for her to come home from college. You're serious, I whispered. She shrugged. I don't want this to turn ugly. Just pack what's yours. Leave the furniture, the antiques, anything that came with the house. When I reached for the porcelain tea set that had belonged to my mother, she stopped me. That stays. It's part of the estate. It was my mother's, I protested. And now it's part of mine, she said flatly. The next few days passed in a blur of boxes, silent tears, and small humiliations. Madison oversaw everything as if I were a tenant being evicted. On the last morning, she stood in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing a new silk dress and that same unshakable confidence. I don't take this personally, Mom, she said. Dad made his choice. Maybe this is your chance to start over. I wanted to scream, but all I could manage was a quiet nod. Then I loaded my suitcases into my old Honda and drove away from the house where my life had happened. As I reached the end of Maplewood Avenue, I looked in the rearview mirror. Madison stood on the porch, her figure small against the mansion's white pillars. I thought I saw her smile. By the time I reached the cabin on Pine Ridge, the sun was slipping behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of fading gold and gray. The place looked even worse than I remembered. The roof sagged on one side, the porch steps creaked dangerously, and the paint had peeled away until only thin strips of wood showed through. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust clung to everything like a memory that refused to die. There was no electricity, no running water, just silence, deep and unforgiving. I sat on the old floorboards that first night, wrapped in a thin blanket, and listened to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls. I cried quietly, the kind of tears that don't come from anger but from the hollow space where love used to live. My daughter had turned her back on me. The home I had built with my husband was gone. The world had grown suddenly small and sharp. The next morning, I forced myself to act. I swept the floor, patched holes with tape and cardboard, and found an old lantern that still worked. Each small repair was a way to fight despair. I walked half a mile to the old well to draw water, the metal bucket cold against my hands. My palms blistered after the first few trips, but I didn't stop. On the third day, the phone rang, a voice I recognized immediately. "Rebecca? It's Linda." My younger sister. Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. "I just wanted to ask," she said, "is it true what Madison's been saying?" My heart sank. "What has she been saying, Linda?" "That you made a scene at the lawyer's office. That you attacked Mr. Morrison and tried to claim the money was yours." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's a lie. I didn't do anything of the sort." "She said she's worried about you, that you've been calling her, begging for money." I closed my eyes. The lies spread faster than truth ever could. "Linda," I said softly, "you've known me my whole life. Do you really believe that?" There was a long silence before she answered. I don't know what to believe." When the line went dead, I sat there staring at the wall until the shadows lengthened and swallowed the room. Madison hadn't just taken my home, she was taking my reputation, my dignity, piece by piece. But as night fell over the forest, I made myself a quiet promise. If she thought this cabin would break me, she was wrong. She had no idea who her mother truly was. A week passed before I saw another soul. One afternoon, as I was gathering firewood, I heard the familiar rumble of an old pickup approaching. It was Mr. Harlan, my late husband's longtime friend and former co-worker. He stepped out slowly, his weathered hands gripping a paper bag. "Thought you could use some supplies," he said with a gentle smile, holding up canned soup, candles, and matches. His kindness nearly broke the wall of composure I had built around myself. We sat on the porch steps for a while, watching the pine trees sway. "Robert used to talk about this place," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "Said there was more to this land than met the eye. He was a smart man, your husband. Don't underestimate what he left you." I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, he tipped his hat and drove away, leaving me with a strange unease. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words echoed through my head, "More to this land than met the eye." The next morning I decided to do a thorough cleaning. The cabin was small, but the floorboards creaked and shifted under my steps, as if hiding secrets of their own. Near the back corner, I noticed one plank slightly lifted at the edge. I crouched down, pried it open, and there, half buried beneath years of dust and dirt, was a small brass key. It was old and heavy, engraved with delicate patterns I didn't recognize. My heartbeat quickened. What could it possibly unlock? I searched every drawer, every cabinet, every wall panel. Hours passed until I found a faint metal outline behind an old shelf in the cellar, a small square door embedded in stone. My hands trembled as I brushed away cobwebs and fitted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow space carved into the wall. Inside lay a thick envelope, sealed with wax, and a small metal box covered in dust. My breath caught. I carried both upstairs and set them on the table. The lantern light flickered across the objects, making them glow faintly, almost reverently. For a long time I simply stared, afraid to touch them, afraid of what they might reveal. Finally I whispered to myself, "Robert, what did you do?" That small key had opened more than a hidden compartment. It had unlocked a truth buried deeper than I ever imagined. The envelope was thick and yellowed with age. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a folded letter in Robert's unmistakable handwriting. The moment I saw his looping cursive, my throat tightened. I could almost hear his voice. "My dear Rebecca," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you have found what I left behind. I hope Madison wasn't too cruel, though knowing her nature she probably was. I need you to understand why I did what I did." I paused, tears already forming. I took a deep breath and kept reading. "You've always been the heart of this family. You sacrificed more than anyone ever noticed. I wanted to protect you, even after I was gone. Madison, she has my ambition, but not my patience or kindness. If I had left everything in your hands, she would have taken it from you, one way or another. So I left her what she thought she wanted, and left you what she would never value enough to steal." I pressed the paper to my chest. His words felt like both an apology and a promise. "I know that cabin looks worthless," the letter continued, "but it isn't. Decades ago, my father purchased the mineral rights to this entire stretch of land, 200 acres, extending beyond what you can see from the porch. The land was surveyed again recently. There are veins of quartz, possibly amethyst and tourmaline. The documentation is inside the metal box. I refused several offers before my death because I wanted the right person to decide what happens next. That person is you." I covered my mouth, my pulse racing. The cabin wasn't a punishment, it was an inheritance. Robert's final words were written in a slightly trembling hand. "I trust you, Rebecca. You've always had the strength to survive the hard way. Find what's yours, live freely. And remember, I loved you more than you ever knew." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the ink. I opened the metal box with both hands trembling. Inside were legal papers, survey maps, and an unsigned purchase offer from a mining company. The number at the bottom made my breath catch. It was for $7 million. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The silence of the cabin felt different now, not empty, but full of possibility. Robert had left me far more than money. He had left me a second chance. The following morning, I drove into town with the documents carefully tucked inside a manila folder. My hands were still unsteady on the steering wheel. I hadn't slept, too busy reading every line of Robert's notes until dawn. The words mineral rights repeated in my head like a secret code only he and I shared. I found an attorney in the neighboring town, someone Madison didn't know. His name was Mr. Peterson, an older man with silver hair and calm, curious eyes. He took his time scanning the papers, his expression slowly shifting from politeness to genuine intrigue. "Mrs. Quinn," he said finally, adjusting his glasses, "these documents are legitimate. Your husband filed them properly decades ago. The mineral rights are entirely in your name, separate from any estate inheritance. No one, not even your daughter, can contest them." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Are they worth anything?" He smiled slightly. "That depends. Have you considered a geological assessment? If your husband was right about the minerals, it could be worth a great deal." By the next week, a geologist named Dr. Alan Reeves arrived at Pine Ridge. He was a tall man with a soft voice and eyes that gleamed whenever he spoke about rocks. He brought strange equipment, ground sensors, drilling tools, little flags he planted in the soil like he was claiming pieces of a forgotten world. For 3 days he worked from sunrise to sunset. I followed him through the woods, learning words I had never used before: amethyst, quartz veins, green tourmaline. He explained patiently that such minerals, if found in large enough deposits, could be worth millions. On the 4th day he handed me a report, his smile wide with excitement. "Miss Quinn," he said, "you're sitting on a treasure. High-quality quartz and gem-grade amethyst throughout the property. And the green tourmaline, if the vein continues deeper, it could easily exceed 10 or 15 million in value." 10 to 15 million. My knees nearly gave out. That night, as I sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the forest, I whispered Robert's name into the quiet. He had known. Somehow, he had known I would find the truth. And while Madison was spending her inheritance on designer shoes and champagne dinners, I was sitting in the same cabin she called worthless, quietly holding a fortune she could never touch. I didn't rush to do anything reckless. Robert had been a cautious man, and now I understood why. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over something that truly mattered. I met with Mr. Peterson again, and together we began the process of negotiating the sale of the mineral rights. He handled everything quietly, discreetly. No public listings, no announcements, just direct communication with reputable mining companies. After weeks of review and careful bargaining, we closed a deal for $12 million, plus lifetime royalties. Mr. Peterson smiled when we signed the papers. "Your husband would be proud of how you've handled this," he said. $12 million. The number didn't feel real. I wasn't interested in luxury or revenge. I only wanted peace. I decided to stay in the cabin, at least for a while, though I installed electricity, running water, and a small generator out back. From the road, the place still looked abandoned, just as Madison expected, but inside it was warm, bright, and alive again. I bought new curtains, a sturdy wooden table, and a second-hand armchair that creaked just like Robert's used to. The simple comforts made the silence easier to bear. I spent my mornings reading by the window and my evenings baking small loaves of bread in an old oven that somehow still worked. In town, people began to treat me differently. They pitied me, the poor woman cast out by her wealthy daughter. I let them. Sympathy was a comfortable disguise. No one suspected that while they offered me casseroles and kind words, I was quietly building an empire of my own. At night, I'd step outside and look toward the lights of Maplewood, faint on the horizon. Somewhere in that glow, Madison was probably sipping wine in a new dress, still believing she had won. I didn't hate her. I simply knew that life had a way of teaching lessons on its own. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting, and in the stillness of that cabin I had never felt stronger. 6 months later, word began to spread around town. I didn't have to ask. Small towns have a way of delivering gossip straight to your doorstep. "Your daughter's been spending like there's no tomorrow," said Mrs. Green, the grocer's wife, while ringing up my groceries. "New cars, a European trip, and that big charity gala in Boston. Quite the lifestyle." I nodded politely, pretending surprise. Inside, I wasn't shocked at all. Madison had always loved the attention, the flash of expensive things that made her feel untouchable. But even money has limits, and I knew she was testing them. By late autumn, whispers turned into murmurs. People said Madison had started taking out loans against her inheritance. She was investing in something, a business expansion, she called it, but the details were fuzzy. I overheard snippets at the post office, in the diner, even at church. Each one painted the same picture. Madison Quinn, the golden daughter, was living far beyond her means. One afternoon, while waiting in line at the bank, I heard her voice through the next booth. She was speaking to the teller in that same commanding tone she had always used with me. "I need to transfer $50,000 to my investment account. And check the status of the loan application, please." The teller's polite tone couldn't hide the concern. "Ms. Quinn, I'm afraid your credit line is nearly maxed out." Madison sighed dramatically. "It's temporary. My next payout will cover it." When she turned around, I ducked behind a partition, unseen. She looked perfect as always, hair done, heels high, but there was a tension in her movements, a flicker of panic behind her polished smile. By winter, the signs were undeniable. She sold one of her cars. Then another. Her social media posts, once full of luxury, became sparse. The shine was fading. One chilly evening, I saw her in the pharmacy downtown. She didn't notice me. Her eyes were red, her hair unkempt, her voice trembling as she asked the pharmacist if her insurance covered anxiety medication. For a long moment, I just watched her. This was the daughter who had thrown me out of my own home, the one who believed she would never fall. And yet, there she was, fragile, lost, and afraid. That night, as I sat beside the fire in my quiet cabin, the phone rang. "Mom," came the small, shaking voice on the other end. "I need to talk to you. Please." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You know where to find me," I said softly, and I hung up. The night Madison arrived, the rain was relentless. Headlights flashed through the trees as her car crawled up the narrow dirt road. When I stepped onto the porch, she was already out of the vehicle, no longer the polished woman I remembered, but someone smaller, trembling, her clothes soaked through. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "Please, I need help." I didn't answer right away. I simply held the door open. "Come in, Madison." Inside, the warmth of the fire filled the silence between us. She stood awkwardly near the table, glancing around as if seeing the cabin for the first time. "It's nicer than I thought," she murmured. I poured her a cup of tea and sat down across from her. "Tell me what's happened." Her shoulders sagged. "I made terrible mistakes. I thought the money would last forever. I bought things, I invested in a friend's company, it failed. I owe $400,000. I'm going to lose everything." I let her words sink in before speaking. $400,000, I repeated slowly. "That's quite a fall from $6 million. Tears filled her eyes. "I know I don't deserve your help. I said awful things to you. I was cruel. Please, Mom, you're all I have left." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. I studied her face, the same features I once kissed goodnight, now lined with guilt and exhaustion. "Madison, I said finally. 6 months ago, you told me to live with the pigs. You took my mother's tea set, my memories, my dignity. Why should I help you now? She broke down then, sobbing quietly into her hands. Because I'm not that person anymore. I leaned back, thinking of Robert's letter, his faith in me to make the right choice. Maybe this was part of the test too. I'll help you, I said at last, and she lifted her head, eyes wide with disbelief. But not as a gift, as a loan with conditions. Anything, she whispered. You'll work here every Saturday for 5 years, you'll show respect in this house. And at Christmas, you'll write a letter of apology to the family and read it aloud. Her face flushed with shame, but she nodded. Yes, Mom, I'll do it. I handed her a pen and paper, then we have a deal. As she signed her name, a quiet calm settled over me. For the first time, I wasn't the mother begging for love. I was the teacher, and she was finally ready to learn. A full year passed before either of us truly spoke about what had happened. In that time, Madison kept every promise. She came to the cabin each Saturday without fail, scrubbing floors, repairing fences, carrying firewood. Her soft hands blistered, her pride slowly melted away. But week after week, something remarkable began to happen. We started talking again. At first it was small things, the weather, old memories, recipes she used to love. But soon she began to ask real questions. About her father. About life. About how I had managed to keep going when everything fell apart. By December, she had written her apology letter. On Christmas Eve, in front of the whole family, she stood trembling as she read it aloud. Her voice cracked when she said, I judged my mother by what she didn't have, instead of what she had given me. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, I saw tears in Linda's eyes and respect in everyone else's. Spring came, and with it, a quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I sold the cabin and bought a beautiful home on a hill overlooking Maplewood Valley. When Madison arrived for her weekly visit, she stopped in awe at the front gate. Mom, what is this place? My new home, I said simply. Paid for with the land you thought was worthless. She blinked, her mouth opening slightly. You mean Dad knew? Yes, I smiled. He always did. Madison nodded slowly, tears forming. You could have let me drown. I could have, I said, resting my hand over hers, but I chose to teach you how to swim. The sun poured through the windows, lighting the room in gold. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger or spite, it's patience, wisdom, and love that refuses to give up. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. Because stories like this remind us healing is its own victory.